Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to AICC's, gosh, we think is like the 14th COVID call. I'm Taryn Pyle, and I'll be hosting the call today. And if you're new to AICC's webinars, I want to welcome you. The call today will be 60 minutes long. A link to the recording is set up on the website every Monday following the conference. In the event we go over the time allotted, any other questions can be sent via email, and AICC staff or the presenter will follow up individually. With technology, there's always a possibility of losing a connection, sound, or viewing of the presentation. We'll keep you posted on the status of any of these problems using the chat feature. However, if it happens on your end, you just need to sign back in if you get a dial tone. As we begin, please remember AICC is an international trade association, and as such, members are bound to uphold the letter and spirit of all applicable competition and antitrust laws, including those of the US and Canada. During this meeting, there will be no discussion allowed concerning prices, customers, customer or market allocations, specific accounts, discounts, terms, and all other matters prohibited by law. And now I'd just like to turn this on over to Mike D'Angelo, who will be handling the call today.
Thank you, Taryn. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to our now every other week video conference. It's good to see everyone as always, especially on a Friday as the days are getting warmer and the days are getting longer. We truly appreciate your support and your participation because you are the ones that really make this thing happen. Just a couple of brief updates from my side. Since we met last, we've been sharing some limited information on the COVID daily updates. Things are starting to settle into a lower pace, and there's just not as much to share or announce. But one major announcement came out a week ago today from regarding the PPP Paycheck Protection Program relative to the public disclosure requirement that's now been added. Any member company that's received more than $150,000 for this program, the government will now be revealing information about you, your firm, etc. We put some details up, a link today. I think we put one up 2 days ago as well. So if you have not checked that out, or if you are not aware of this and you've taken more than $150,000, information about your company will be posted as a matter of record at some time in the near future. Like everything else going on with the PPP program, it's at some time in the near future and things continue to develop. So we ask you to keep an eye on that and we'll keep you as up to date as we can. Also with the spikes in certain states and seemingly going backwards in a few other places, I know the governor of Texas today is closing the restaurants and the bars for being inside again. Just remind you that we are running a link to state updates. It's a NAM website, but it is an effective one. Pretty simple. You just click on your state, and if there's any new information there, it'll show up right away. So I imagine if things are going to start to retrograde a bit in certain parts of the country, you may see some new updates from state and local authorities that the NAM will capture and share with you through that link at AICC's COVID Daily Update. All right, with that behind us, we have a keynote speaker today, Scott Jones of Scott Jones Financial, a lifelong, this is the first time I've ever said this word, Charlottean. Scott has been providing financial services to business owners, key executives, and business advisors since 1988. He's a specialist in business continuity planning, executive benefits, and wealth transfer strategies. Scott holds the designations, that is, he has some credentials, of certified financial planner, chartered life underwriter, and chartered financial consultant. He's going to share with us some insight on a number of issues relative to your businesses, particularly small businesses, and we've kind of boiled that down to the fundamentals still apply. So without further ado, Scott Jones, please.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that. Let me make sure I can get my screen up here. Michael, thank you for that introduction, and it is Charlottean. So I am a lifelong Charlottean, been in Charlotte most of my life, went to school at the University of North Carolina, and as you said, got in the financial services business about 30 years ago, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share with you guys today, and look forward to sharing a little bit about growing and protecting your business, not just during a pandemic, but really always. So I do think a lot of what we're going to talk about is really applicable beyond a pandemic. There's no secret that we're in interesting, if not challenging times right now. And, you know, a lot of business owners are facing the second economic crisis in just over a decade, for those of you that have been in business for that long. The Great Recession, I don't think people saw coming, but we probably should have. But I don't think anybody saw COVID-19 coming. And so these are two pretty significant economic challenges that business owners have had to navigate. And we don't know really how COVID-19 is going to end. We don't know when it's going to end. I think a lot depends on, you know, where you are in the country, and I think there's a lot to be determined. But we've talked to a lot of business owners over the past 3 months, and I can tell you that it's all over the board what people are experiencing. We talked to some is that it's business as usual, and they're actually thriving. I would say that's the exception, but those businesses have some unique opportunities to take advantage of their success and potentially reinvest in growth. What we're hearing more of is probably the second category. A lot of people feel like business is very good. I would say this applies to our firm. Our business has been very good. I don't know about where everybody else lives, but Charlotte, North Carolina, in January and February, the economy was absolutely booming. And so most good businesses had a very healthy pipeline, and many of those businesses are continuing to work through that pipeline. But what I consistently hear is there's caution and there's concern about, you know, what we may face 6, 12, 18 months down the road. And I think prospecting for new business is a little bit of a challenge for a lot of businesses right now. Just communication's different, and businesses are a little cautious. And then, of course, some are devastated, and that would be your restaurants, the entertainment industry, health clubs, clearly still not open. And so there's a lot of businesses that probably will not survive this. Over the years, we have identified 3 key areas of planning that really all business owners at some level are thinking about, working on. But it's also been our experience that these 3 circles are rarely aligned unless there's strategic planning. And, you know, most business owners, their biggest asset is their business. And it is that business that's going to fund retirement for many, and their ability to maximize the value of that business between now and retirement. And it's also the asset that's going to create the legacy for the family in many cases. And so we are big advocates for aligning these 3 strategies. And what oftentimes happens is you've got a stockbroker, you've got a financial advisor helping with the retirement income planning, but it's not coordinated with the business plan and the buy-sell funding that, or the buy-sell planning that the business attorney may have done, and the estate planning attorney has done the estate planning documents, you know, maybe even 15 or 20 years ago. So rarely are these 3 combined. And one of the things we focus on is trying to align these 3 areas of planning. One of the things we want to talk about today is how you can run your business so you can leave it in style. And I'm not suggesting anybody wants to leave their business anytime soon. One of the things, and when you talk about leaving your business in style, what does that really mean? And we would suggest it means ultimately, at some point in the future, you leave the business on your terms. And that means you leave it when you want to leave it. You leave it to the people you want to leave it to for the amount of money that you need to meet your objectives. And we have also learned that business owners rarely get fired. And so many of them never plan to leave as a result of that. And we think that's not a good idea. You need to have a plan, because we know that it is a fact that all business owners will one day exit their business, willingly or otherwise. And we also know that, that they want maximum value when they do, to accomplish all of their personal and financial goals and objectives. You know, I mentioned, or Michael mentioned, that I entered the business about 30 years ago. I got my CFP, Certified Financial Planner designation, early on, but I knew I wanted to work with business owners. And what I learned very early on is the traditional CFP financial planning process is not as applicable for the business owner. He doesn't get excited when we talk about saving $19,000 in a 401k, and he looks at his plan very, very differently. And I was fortunate to come across a group called Business Enterprise Institute that really took a holistic approach to helping a business owner plan throughout their business career. And it's called an exit planning process, but it is not about, I'm going to exit my business in 90 days. How do I do it? It's really a process. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about all 7 of these steps today. We're really going to focus on, if you look at the middle 5 boxes, we're going to focus on the first one, which is maximizing and protecting business value, which I think is very relevant, especially in challenging times. How do we grow our business? How do we protect it? And then we're going to talk about this step 6, the 4th box on the second line, which is business continuity planning. The other box is also very important. I'll briefly touch on those. Most business owners are going to have a decision to make. They're either going to transfer their ownership to a third party, they're going to sell to a third party, or they're going to transfer it, sell it, or gift it to their children or their key employees. And that's a decision that it can be fluid sometimes. Oftentimes business owners think they're going to leave it to their kids. And then what they find out when it's time to exit is one of 2 things. Oftentimes they find out the kids aren't capable of running the business. And if they are capable of running the business, they never have any money. And so that presents another challenge as to how are they going to do it. And usually it's with company cash flow. And so sometimes they'll default to the third-party sale because it's easier and you can typically get more cash up front. And certainly coordinating all this with your estate planning, I think, is critical. But regardless of which of these boxes you focus on in the middle there, we always start with what are the owner's objectives? What are they trying to accomplish? And what resources do they have currently? What is the value of the business? And what does their personal balance sheet look like? And oftentimes we find that there is a gap between where they want to be and what they feel like they need and what they actually have. And so I wanted to spend a minute talking about common, you might call these universal objectives that we find. These certainly aren't all inclusive. And these can change, these can be fluid. And oftentimes business owners aren't crystal clear when we talk to them. Especially if they're younger, they're not crystal clear about what their long-term goals are. But I think over time, you want to consider what's really important to you. And most people want to retire to pursue personal goals, travel, spend time with grandchildren, golf. Family businesses are concerned and interested in family harmony, and that is particularly important when you have children in the business and children outside the business. And we have a conversation with business owners all the time about fair is not necessarily equal and equal is not necessarily fair. And that can be a challenging conversation, is how do you equalize the value of your estate when you've got some in the business. And sometimes you have a rock star in the business and you've got another son that's not so, that doesn't contribute quite as much, and you've got to navigate that. A legacy, both financial and values, leaving values behind is important to a lot of business owners. Business owners, one of the reasons many business owners transfer it to children and key employees is they want that culture. They love the culture they built. They want to see it continue, and that's not guaranteed in a third-party sale. They typically want to take care of the people who helped them get there, their key employees. That tends to be very important to most of the business owners that we work with. They want to tie in their charitable goals, and it's best to have those conversations. We oftentimes see business owners that say, hey, I'll deal with all my charitable giving once I cash out and move on. And there's some creative things that business owners can do by gifting stock either to a donor advised fund, trust, charitable giving fund, all sorts of creative tax plays if you start your charitable giving long before you actually transfer your ownership. And a lot of that's tax motivated and philanthropy. And I've yet to meet a business owner that says, can we give them just a little bit more? Every business owner I talk to, they want to disinherit the IRS if they can. I've never heard one say, let's leave them 10%. So that's a universal objective. Everybody wants to minimize taxes. And we would suggest there's three big questions that every business owner eventually has to get crystal clear on. And that is, when do you want to exit your business? Who do you want to leave it to? Do you want to leave it to insiders? Again, key employees, family, maybe an ESOP is an option for you. Or do you want to transfer it to a third party? And again, that can be very fluid. Companies sometimes think they want to go take it to a third party buyer, and they find out they can't get nearly as much as they thought they could. And so that's why it's important to value that business early in the process so we can work on growing it, which is what we're going to transition to here shortly. And then the last thing is, how much do you want or need? And that's an important part. What do you want or need out of this business to go with your 401k and your other assets? I mentioned earlier that most business owners, their single largest asset, a typical business owner for me, as an example, might have a business value of, call it 20 million. It could be more or less than that, but the proportions tend to work out. He typically has as a second biggest asset his real estate holdings, which would include his home, maybe a second home, oftentimes the land and the building that they operate out of, they own. Almost to a T, those are the two biggest assets. They typically have cash, they've got a little bit in their 401k, they've got a little bit stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, but the business is what's going to drive their financial success. And so when we go through this exercise of valuing the business and figuring out what they want versus what they actually have, oftentimes there's a gap. And so when there's a gap, we've got to figure out how do we grow the business? How do we drive value? And so we call these value drivers. And so the first two that you see on this screen are by far the most important. You grow value in your business by growing cash flow. Or in times like now, during a crisis, maybe you need to restore cash flow before you start growing it again. You're trying to get back to where you were. And we oftentimes talk about transferable cash flow. We want to build cash flow that can be transferred to the next owner. Cash flow that's not dependent on the owner. And we'll talk a little more about that as we move forward in this presentation. Motivating and retaining key employees, building a management team is absolutely critical to building value in the business. And so we think it's important to review incentive plans to make sure that your key employees' compensation is aligned with the owner's objectives, which more often than not is growing cash flow and growing business value. And you want to make sure you're rewarding your key employees for improving performance. And ultimately, they're going to run this business, you hope, either after a third-party sale, or perhaps they're the future owners. You want to solidify and diversify your customer base. We have an awesome client, incredible cash flow. They've had it for a long time. 90% of their business comes from one client. We would argue that's dangerous. It's Duke Power is the client that they have, and they have been a beautiful client. They're the goose that keeps producing the golden eggs for this company. But if they ever lose that client, they're going to be in trouble. And so certainly a third-party buyer is going to discount the value of that business unless that client is locked down. And ideally, you want to diversify. You don't want customer concentration. And I mentioned it early, some businesses are thriving. And so if you're thriving relative to the competition, this could be a great opportunity to grow by acquisition. Perhaps you can acquire some of your competitors. And they're a little more vulnerable potentially, and maybe they want to sell because that's the best exit strategy for them and the best way to monetize what they've got. especially if they're worried about surviving a crisis like this. We think it's important to continue to review your operating systems. Are they efficient, effective, up to date? Obviously unique to the time we're in now, but you want to make sure, and Michael talked about it a little bit, the PPP loan. You want to understand the government programs that are available to you. Work with your CPA, work with your banker. Those guys have been crazy busy the past 90 days, inundated with calls about these government programs. As we all know, you think you understand them, and then there's a new change. And so these plans came out so fast, and they continue to evolve. So it's important that we understand them, and that we follow the rules, and that we take advantage of them as business owners. Tax minimization strategies, always important. Early in my career, there were a lot more C corporations than there are today. Over the years, I've watched more and more businesses, for tax reasons, to avoid double taxation, convert from C to S. And until recently, we're starting to see people at least having the conversation with the low 20s, 22% federal tax bracket now, as opposed to the high of 35 that it was before. Some are considering going back to a C Corp. And so you need to be having that conversation with your CPA, your other advisors. Are you structured properly? Are you maximizing your qualified plan? Lots of tax minimization strategies that a good proactive CPA and financial advisor should be able to help you with. It's always important to increase cash, to have cash on hand. We've all heard cash is king. One thing that I observed in the Great Recession, those that really survived went into it with a pretty healthy balance sheet, because you needed it to survive. And those that did not, those that were heavily leveraged, didn't have heavy cash positions, got hurt. Many of them did. And so that can create staying power. The other observation I have made is everybody, it seems, everybody since then has been more sensitive to the need to have cash on hand. I have been amazed 2013, 14, 15, 16, as business was really, really good, how they were stockpiling cash. And I think that's prudent. And I think they remember 2008 and 9, and they want to make sure that, and so that's, those that have done that are built to weather the storm we're in right now a little bit better than those, again, that are light on cash and heavy on debt. So you want to manage the debt and your cash position appropriately. Contingency planning, very important. We talk about it a lot. I call it the fire drill. And oftentimes, we talk to business owners, they tell me how great their business is, how they're going to grow it. They got great plans. And I ruin the conversation by saying, what's the fire drill look like? And they say, what do you mean? And I say, what happens if you become part of a grill on a Mack truck tonight? What happens to your business? And that's a question every business owner needs to be asking themselves, and they need to have an answer. And the answer isn't, I have life insurance. I mean, that helps, but you also need to have a plan. And I have seen this in action both ways. We had a great client that died. We delivered $4 million of death benefit. His wife had no clue what to do with the business, and she kept investing in the business so she could make payroll, because she was trying to preserve his legacy. We kept telling her, you can't keep doing this. And she was so emotional. She finally liquidated the business, but that was the call that should have been made early on. And so having a plan up front, we've seen others where, there was a beautiful plan, it was funded, and it was business as usual. So important to have a plan. And clearly, key people, we talked about the importance of building a management team. If they are truly important, you want to make sure you're tying them to the organization, and we'll talk about that a little more as well. And you also want to protect the business should they die or become disabled, or should the owner die or become disabled. And then again, I'm repeating myself, but you got to build that solid management team and begin to groom a successor, assuming you're going to transfer to an insider, but you got to have the management team regardless. ultimately. And so we talk a lot about, we talked about value drivers, and then there's transferable value. What is transferable value? I love these two quotes, and I'll just read them to you. You can read them along. But the key to a company achieving its strategic goals often lies in its ability to attract and retain experienced senior executives. And this, in turn, often depends on the quality of its compensation and benefits program. And so one of the things that we'll talk a little more in the next slide, but our firm really specializes in helping business owners build programs to recruit, reward, and retain their top talent. And then John Brown, the founder of BEI, I love this quote: ultimately, your success is not measured by how well you run your business. It's how well the business runs without you. And so again, you want a business that can run without you, and then you've got something of value. And you could be an absentee owner. If the management team, you don't need to sell it. You can just be an absentee owner well into retirement. If you've got a team that can build it. So that's an option versus selling it during your lifetime. So the key is to have a competent management team that is empowered and that has the ability to run the business in the owner's absence. That we would call is transferable value. And so common executive benefit plans, common plans that are really designed to recruit, reward, and retain your best employees. A supplemental retirement. And let me back up and say, we have found that stock oftentimes is not a good retention tool unless the guy really desires to run and own the business one day, because they don't see the tangible benefit of owning stock in the company, and cash tends not to be a tangible retention tool. That doesn't mean you don't use both of them. You need to pay appropriately. You need appropriate salaries and bonuses. But you want to build some hooks, and you want to appeal to these employees' emotions. And most employees want to retire, and saving for retirement is hard. And so to the extent you can put plans that will pay them a retirement income, deferred compensation is very popular still today. It's been popular really as long as I've been in the business. It's a great way to pay a future benefit. They only get it if they stay. There's employee deferral, deferred comp for people who want to save more than they can in a 401k. But oftentimes it's an employer funded or not funded. It's a promise to pay a future benefit. And so sometimes I use the example, a simple example. If you've got a 45-year-old rock star, you could make him $1 million promise, and that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. So it could be a $500,000 promise. But if you're not going to pay it until he's 65, which is 20 years into the future, and you've got 20 years to accumulate, and then you're going to pay it out over a 10-year period, that $1 million promise doesn't cost as much as it sounds like, and he's got to stay to be able to he's got to reap the benefits of that retirement plan. There's life insurance benefits, different ways to structure that to complement the group term, supplemental disability benefits, long-term care. It really comes down to what's important, what are the corporate objectives, what's going to appeal to the key employees. Do you need a current tax deduction, or do you want control? So deferred comp would be more, you have control and retention. Bonus plans would provide you with more of a tax deduction. So, but designing a benefit plan customized for your key employees, we think is very important and effective if done right. And so business succession and continuity planning, back to kind of the fire drill. The plan is to work to retirement, transfer the business. But this, so it's a business continuity plan really starts with a legal agreement that spells out what happens to a shareholder's interest in the event of a triggering event. And those triggering events can be death, disability, divorce, termination of employment, retirement. You want to make sure that if one of your shareholders goes through a divorce, that there's no way that this other spouse can have access to any of the stock. They may get the value of it, but they're not going to get the stock. Someone dies or becomes disabled, you want to make sure that you're not doing business with the deceased shareholder's family, unless that's what you want. And so it's important to have a legal agreement. There are different types of agreements. I won't get into the details of those, but cross purchase is simply between the shareholders. Entity purchase is between each shareholder and the business. And there's tax benefits to doing it one way or the other potentially. And there's other reasons why you may choose one type of an agreement. And then most agreements tend to be funded in some fashion. Life insurance is very common. Disability insurance you don't see as often, but you got the same issue. Somebody becomes disabled and you've got to buy them out. You've got to come up with the funds to do it. Or you can simply set money aside in a sinking fund, especially to buy out retiring shareholders. So there's lots of benefits to continuity planning. Business interests are transferred according to a plan. Shareholders' interests are protected. Shareholders are assured of a fair price if and when they exit, whether it's by death or termination of employment. It guarantees a buyer for the business interest. It can fix, typically there's a price in there which is important for estate tax purposes. It can help minimize the estate tax. And if you have a divorce, similar situation, you've already pegged the value, so there should be no arguing over what is the business worth if you've got a well-written buy-sell agreement. And of course, life insurance can be available to make sure that the company has the funds to purchase a deceased shareholder's interest out. And so, as you might imagine, business owners are surrounded and need to be surrounded by a team of competent advisors. You may not have all of these. Most everybody has a CPA and a financial advisor. Attorneys can come and go, but it is important to have a team of advisors to help the business owner because you need a lot of specialists. I think the challenge some business owners feel like is what this chart depicts, which is they're in the middle and they're dealing with all these advisors. We believe that ultimately you want a quarterback that sits more in the middle, and that could be your CPA. Anybody really in this wheel could be the lead, but somebody needs to take the lead to keep the business owner on task, to get him out of the middle. It's oftentimes the CPA or the financial advisor, or if there isn't certified exit planner, sometimes it's the attorney, sometimes it's the investment banker. But regardless, it is critical to surround yourself because none of us have the expertise in each one of these areas. And so you need specialists depending on your situation. And so kind of in summary, we would suggest the ingredients of a successful exit plan. And when we talk exit plan, we're talking a 5 to 10 to 20 year process, ideally. I'll start with the bottom, time. The longer you have to plan, the better the outcome is likely to be. Some business owners wake up on Monday, they call their attorney and they say, well, I want to sell my business. Attorney says, when would you like to sell it? He says, I'd like to be out by Friday. Well, that doesn't tend to result in a good outcome. The farther in advance that you can start to work on these value drivers and you can start to develop that management team, very important. And it starts with owner objectives. What do you want? What's important to you? Got to have the right advisors. Cash flow is critical. Need a strong management team. And if you do all those things, you should maximize value. You should minimize risk. And as much as anything, you stay in control of the process. And we think that's critically important. And so with that, that is all of my prepared remarks. I'd be happy to entertain questions. I know Tara and Michael, you had suggested that there was other business and maybe we would do questions.
Well, I think we'll go to, thank you, Scott, first of all, it's very informative. Before we go to questions, I see an opportunity for AICC to make another shameless plug. When you speak of the team of advisors, the team of trusted advisors. AICC has a long-standing member value proposition. We have 9, some long established, some newly established CEO advisory groups, which are groups of 8 to 10 peers that meet on a regular basis. They used to meet, kind of float around and go to each other's plants. It's been more virtual of late. But these are business owners in this industry, non-competing, that understand each other's business fairly well and have helped each other out tremendously, kind of along the lines of what you're saying. Just another star in that constellation that you put around the business owner. And if you're interested, if you're on this this conference call, or if you are listening to it as a recording next week, and you're interested in knowing more about CEO advisory groups, please do reach out to Taryn Pyle at AICC. While Scott's been presenting, Steve has been collecting questions, and we'll turn the floor over to Steve to shoot some questions Scott's way.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the presentation, Scott.
Thank you, Steve.
Very interesting. Yeah, we've had a couple come in here. If the current crisis, the COVID crisis, has changed my timeline for exiting, do you suggest a reevaluation of the entire exit plan, or just those that were somehow time-based?
I think you definitely want to, I think it starts with evaluating, have your objectives changed? And I think one of them has. It is the win. And I'm going to guess that the win, maybe it has been pushed out because of the how much, possibly. I'm speculating. But I don't know that you should not have to necessarily start all over. I don't know enough about this person's individual situation, but I could absolutely, I do think people right now are saying this is not a good time to sell a business. And it could be for some people. So I think it kind of depends, but I would not think you would need to start over. Hopefully you've got a good foundation. If you push the timeline out, I think you go back and you visit all the value drivers. And I guess the question would be, why have you changed it? And I'm guessing that it's because maybe the crisis has value a little bit. And so then it's kind of back to the drawing board. How do we restore that value?
So picking up on that, I think there was a follow-up to this particular person. What effect does the S Corp, C Corp designation have on it and the upcoming election? In other words, might there be tax consequences out of the election upcoming, and how might that affect my plans?
I don't think there's any question that the upcoming election could have a dramatic impact on taxes. It could. Actually, I thought about a presentation, using a presentation that we've done on tax planning. We are in the most favorable estate tax environment we've ever been in, except for 2010 when it went away. But you can effectively, husband and wife, leave 22 million. We are in the most favorable income business tax environment that we have been in, and income tax environment. We are in the most favorable tax environment that we've been in since I've been in the business. And so to think that's going to continue, given government debt is going straight up, I just think you have to assume taxes are going up. I don't care who's in office. I think they could go up dramatically depending on who controls the House and the Senate. And so I don't think there's any question, though, taxes have to go up. And I hate to say that because, you know, I like low taxes. Somehow we've got to balance the budget. The C versus S, the biggest difference is a C Corp is a separate taxable entity. And so the C Corp is taxed, albeit at a very low rate right now, 22%. It used to be 35%, and that's only federal. So depending on what state you're in, an S Corp, the taxes flow through. So you get a K-1 for any profit. So all taxes flow through to the owner. And so they pay that tax once. And so you don't have double taxation. And we've got, you know, if we talk more about selling to an insider, if you were transferring your business to children, there's some unique strategies. You really want to sell the business for as low as you can. You want what's called the lowest defensible value. And that sounds counterintuitive. I want to sell for the most I can. No, if you want to minimize taxes, you sell it for the lowest defensible value, and the owner can fill that gap with deferred compensation for the owner, which is taxed to the company, higher rents maybe if he rents his real estate, consulting fees. There's a lot of tax-friendly ways, especially if you're a pass-through, being a S corp. And so it's probably, you know, I can't do that topic justice in a short period of time, but the biggest difference is S corp passes through, the taxes pass through to the shareholders pro rata. C corp pays its own taxes. Shareholders aren't taxed unless their dividends paid.
Here's another question. It goes to that constellation that Mike referred to earlier. What's the difference between an asset and a wealth manager and a financial advisor?
Well, besides what they call themselves, I mean, I really think you have to look under the hood. Some financial advisors sell stocks, and that's all they do, stocks and bonds. Some financial advisors are financial planners. You know, I would tell you that there are insurance professionals that's all they do. There are asset managers that's really all they do. CFPs tend to be more comprehensive. That doesn't mean that they are experts in insurance necessarily, but they tend to have a working knowledge of insurance. Most CFPs have a bent, though, towards estate planning or insurance. Most everybody has a specialty. We would argue our specialty, we're very well versed as CFPs. I mean, I understand investments and asset allocation, but we hold ourselves out as experts in dealing with the business owner. And we will pull other advisors in if we don't have the expertise. We're not CPAs. I understand S Corp, C Corps, not as well as a CPA though. And so we're going to teamwork with a CPA. I understand estate planning, but not like the estate planning attorney. He's going to draft the documents. I can have the conversation and say, you need to go see, based on your situation, this particular specialist. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but you got to be careful by making assumptions by what people call themselves. You got to get into the weeds and see, what do they do? What's their expertise? What credentials do they have? And then determine, you know, if they can really satisfy your needs.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Thanks,
a great
Matt.
question.
That's Taryn, that's the end of the written questions that I have here. You might want to open it up to the floor.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and post in the chat area. And this is such a small group, you can also raise your hand, and you do that by clicking on the participants list. And at the very bottom, it'll say raise hand or lower hand. Just click on that and I can call on you. There's a really good comment here from Martha Haddon. She says, this is a really great webinar. Just wanted to thank you all for hosting them. Makes my Friday afternoon. Thank you, Martha. Anybody have a question? Think that's it. Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds like everybody wants to get out of Scooch earlier. We're more than happy to oblige. So again, thank you all very much. Scott, thank you for your time and for your expertise. Scott's contact information is on the screen. A recording of this session will be up at the AICC website sometime, probably by about 10 o'clock on Monday morning. We'll post our next topic and the time of video conference at that same website. It will be at least 2 weeks from now, so we wish you in the meantime a happy, healthy, safe 4th of July celebration. And thank you all very much for your support of AICC and our programming. Have a great afternoon.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.